Hi there, Reuben here for Native Instruments. In this video I'll be taking a look at a unique collection of contact instruments from sample library developer Soundiron and giving myself a bit of a tough challenge. Here's a quick clip, I'll play the whole track at the end of the video. The idea here is to create a cohesive musical sketch using some of the most unusual instruments in the Soundiron collection. Now you might have noticed that this video is a part 2, you can check out part 1 on the Native Instruments blog and YouTube channel. In part 1 I used lots of different libraries, but I had the advantage of some conventional instruments like strings and piano which glued the track together. For this part 2 video I'm making things especially hard for myself by limiting the sound palette to some real oddities. So I'll be using alpha organ, shake, didgeridoos, Hopkin Instrumentarium, the U, and Rumba Boxes, along with a smattering of vocals from Voice of Wind Kimba, Voice of Wind Aurdrey, and Olympus choir elements. I'm going to be exploring some of the more esoteric patches within the instruments, so for example instead of hearing a straight up didgeridoo, you'll notice that I've used one of the mutated presets and then added more effects on top. It's all going to get a bit crazy, so let's take a look. First off, a word about the inspiration for this track. Having watched a lot of Dark Crystal Age of Resistance recently, I was struck by how the score by Daniel Pemberton and Samuel Sim wove different textures together, from ancient woody timbres to more sound design. My initial plan was to create something in this vein, but you'll hear how my piece has kind of got a mind of its own and spun off into more electronica territory, although still maintaining a fantastical fantasy feel. So let's remove all the master bus effects and delve into the first two tracks, which are from Soundiron's alpha organ. This is a deep sampled pipe organ recorded at a church in San Francisco. Multiple organ stops have been captured, so you can create many different types of sounds at various levels of power. I've used a different stop for each section, reedy for the crescendo with a swell, and triumph for the main chords. There's also a tempo synced tremolo effect in Logic that gives some constant rhythmic movement. A bit like sidechaining to the beat in a dance track. You might have noticed all of the different effects presets in addition to the raw organ. These are mutated patches that Soundiron often produce alongside more regular patches so that their tools really become effects powerhouses. And there are some libraries of theirs where I rarely use the normal patches, just the sound design ones. In this case, it's the ambiences that I'm going for, with this phased wind tone playing almost all the way through the track. Using the swirl control to give it some movement. The next few tracks are from instrument inventor Bart Hopkin, who makes all kinds of interesting oddities that Soundiron have sampled over the years. This particular creation is a steel lamellophone with a metallic timbre, recorded in regular stereo and also with a binaural microphone. You can stack 2 layers, an ambience effect and a sub-synth in the interface, and there are lots of different playing styles to choose from here. For this track I've swapped between plucks and bowed shorts using key switches. I'll quickly flick to the effects page, which you can find within most Soundiron instruments. This interface has 10 effect slots that you can fill with many different types of processing, in this case filter, rotator, delay and reverb. It was pretty tricky to find big percussive sounds for this piece because I haven't chosen to use any dedicated large drum libraries. However, thanks to the sound design effects patches, there's actually quite a few interesting options. This track uses frame taps and automates the panning, allowing the onboard arpeggiator to handle the rhythmic playback. In this drop-down menu, there are also options for an LFO to be applied to a variety of parameters and also an automated filter. It's a similar story with this track that uses another effects patch. The sound is filled out by 2 layers, an ambience and sine wave sublayer. Again, using arpeggios for the rhythm automation, this time 1 for each of the 4 layers. This next instrument is another treat from Brad Hopkin, a sampled collection of bass kalimbas, this particular one with a variety of pluck, mallet and percussion tones. I've layered up an ambience and triangle synthwave here as well. Let's talk about polyrhythms for a second. Having polyrhythms and loops of different lengths playing simultaneously is a cool trick that I like to use. It keeps repetitive tracks sounding fresh. Another thing I like to do is always keep the sounds moving in some way, and for this track I've used both methods. The loop is actually 7 beats long rather than a multiple of 4, and the swell levels of all 3 layers are constantly being automated so that the tone of the sound changes throughout the piece. You can see the swell dials being automated for the different layers just here. You'll also see that the ambience layer has sample offset start automation. This is so a different part of the evolving sample triggers as the track progresses. I wrote this automation in manually by setting my DAW to write all plugin parameters, and then twisted the dials on my Complete Control keyboard as the track played, and then I went into the automation and cleaned things up a bit. Pretty easy. All of these elements moving together keep things interesting in an otherwise rather static loop. Soundiron's Didgeridoos library is a real treasure trove of unusual tones and performances, including solos and ensemble groups, rhythmic grooves, vowel sounds and beatbox effects. With over 9 GB of content, there's a lot to sift through, but I've chosen 3 of my favourite patches here. The first track uses some of these interesting woody tones. The second track uses a sustain rhythm at 80 BPM, which is automatically time stretched to fit the 100 BPM of my piece. There's actually many different types of sustain and also faster recordings at 120 BPM. Like other instruments I've shown so far, there's a 4-layer engine with not only authentic dig performances, but also plenty of mangled effects and ambiences. With this track I've gone a bit wild, transforming a didgeridoo lip smack into a lo-fi metallic beat. This is achieved entirely in the Soundiron effects engine by adding distortion, delay, phaser, lo-fi, reverb and tape saturation. You can hear the difference when all these effects are turned off. And back on again. Next up, some shaker rhythms to drive the track along and add some ear candy. These are the types of sounds that you should always consider adding to your music just low in the mix to give some swing and top-end sparkle. Soundiron's Shake contains nearly 100 different types of shakers, rattles, tambourines and bells. The performed loops have all been sliced up into individual samples that can be automatically or manually rearranged to create new rhythms. In the case of my piece, I've kept things pretty simple, but again steered away from standard 4/4 rhythms to create polyrhythms for the 3 different tracks. The first 2 shaker tracks are panned slightly left and right to increase separation. Then the third tambourine track is panned centrally, but with the slice playback randomized to add to the unpredictable nature of the rhythms. All played together, the 3 tracks give a solid basis for the rhythm section, whilst never becoming too boring. There's one final shaker track, a one-shot gourd hit layered up with white noise, sent through distortion and a long reverb. The last few tracks are all about vocals, with elements from a couple of Soundiron's emotional solo libraries and their Olympus choir. Voice of Wind Kimba is packed full of solo vocals and effects from a mezzo-soprano. There are patches for full legato, staccato, sustains, and many performed phrases recorded in different root keys, some of which I've used here, with lots of reverb and delay. The next track features another standout vocalist, Voice of Wind Aurdrey, although you don't get to hear much of her range in my piece. Again, there are lots of categories of vocal. I've chosen to use some muffled short vowels as a melodic motif. There are many vowels recorded loud and soft. So I've used a gentle sound at the beginning of the track and louder R doubled in octaves at the climax. Olympus Choir Elements is one of Soundiron's standout choirs. Although it's a streamlined and simplified version of its big brother Olympus Symphonic Choir, it still retains all of the power and drama of the 63-piece choral section. There are mixed male and female sections, and these have also been split out by sex and further by divisi, soprano, alto, tenor and bass. The main patches feature legato, marcato, sustain, staccato, vowels, effects, and a fun phrase maker as well. And as ever, there are lots of twisted effects patches too. This first choir track mimics what the organs are doing at the climax of the track, but with a gentle men's choir singing an sound. When you're sketching, you can literally copy and paste the MIDI and assign different sounds to move the composing along more quickly. There are a few little choir rises dotted into the track to support the moments of crescendo from the other instruments. Worth noting that I've added additional reverb to both of these choir patches. Very simple in Olympus Elements, just click the reverb button and adjust to taste. Have a listen to this final track. Believe it or not, this is a patch from the choir library too, but it sounds just like some kind of 80s synth arpeggio. Another testament to Soundiron's wizardry at sound design. So that's the bulk of the track. I'd say it's about 90% there, even in this sketch form. I could probably finesse the mixing of the vocals and percussion just a little, but all of the elements are in place. There's a quick and dirty mastering chain. I've added a very subtle reverb to help tie all of the elements together, just stock ambience from Logic with a 7% wet level. If you've seen any of my other sketching videos, you'll see Isotope Ozone is a nice catch-all mastering plugin. It's a speedy solution to give me a preview of what a pro mastering job might sound like. EQ cuts off the ultra lows, dips at around 500Hz to remove some mud, and also boosts the highs. Stereo imaging brings the bass frequencies back to the centre and widens out the top end. Some light multiband compression in 3 separate bands, and a tiny amount of limiting to shave off some of the wilder dynamics as the track builds to the end. I hope you've enjoyed taking a look at my composition process for this track. It's all about finding unusual instruments that still play nicely together and keeping things interesting with polyrhythms and by automating parameters of the sounds using complete control. Thanks for watching, see you next time.